Morning everyone and welcome to this webinar. Let me begin with an acknowledgement of our traditional owners of the lands we are all meeting on and pay our respects to them, to elders past, present and emerging. We also take this opportunity to thank them for the continued care of our land, sea, country, community and culture. I'm dialing in Turrbal and from the lands of the Turrbal and Jagera people, and I invite you to acknowledge the country you are tuning in from in the chat function. I'm Claire Hanratty. I'm a member of the Advisory Committee of the Australian International Development Network, or AIDN, and on behalf of the entire AIDN team, I'd like to welcome you all. AIDN's purpose is to encourage more and better international giving and investing. We do this by raising awareness, forging alignment, and opportunities for action. Achieving this goal means we bring together a diverse range of expertise and experience, just like all of the people that I'm joined by today. I'd like to introduce you to our facilitator session, Stuart Makara Thompson. Stuart's the co-founder of the Good Business Foundation, as well as Chief of Staff to the President of the Confederation of Asia Pacific Chambers of Commerce and Industry. I know you're all really interested to hear about this webinar and hear what Stuart and our panelists have to say. So I'm going to hand you straight over to Stuart. And apologies, Stuart, I have completely mispronounced your name there.
Okay, thanks, Claire, and thanks to AIDN. I just want to say thank you to the AIDN team for this partnership to put together this webinar, but also, for the partnership we have around impact investing and trying to encourage more and better giving to developing countries as well as investing to developing countries. So thank you to AIDN. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world watching this webinar. I'm pretty excited about today's topic and one that has interested me for some time. It's in the backdrop of the Asia Pacific Impact Investment Summit that's happening at the end of this week. And I'm heading up from where I am tomorrow to Sydney to take part. I hope to see many of you there and we can engage in further conversation. But before I start, I also wish to acknowledge the lands on which I'm calling you from or calling in from today, the lands of the Wathaurong people. Also known as Geelong, sometimes to some people these days. Also a great football side here as well. I would also like to state also before we start that the information in this webinar is not financial advice, and you should consider your own independent advice before investing based on the information here today. So our work at the Good Business Foundation and also at the Confederation of Asia Pacific Chambers of Commerce and Industry is pretty simple. We just believe that doing good business results in good lives. With investors, employees and consumers wishing to align their values with either their time, their treasure or their talent, it's critical for business to get good business right. And often we hear about big business making announcements or governments signing up to international agreements. And these are all really good things. But whilst they are necessary, they're not sufficient. The majority of the financial transactions happening globally are happening at medium and small sized businesses like your local shops, or they're decisions that are made around the family dining table. Collectively, we have a lot of power. So to reach impact at scale, as they say, we must all act. Now, beyond our household purchases, where we work, what we do with our time, how we volunteer, what's left? Well, for many of us, it's, our $30, our $50 a month donation to our local charity or charity of choice. Or even some of us have our money sitting, small amounts of money sitting in savings. And we're thinking, is that actually creating good? Is that in the right place? Can that $5,000 actually be used for something better? And can it be possible, as Tom Dawkins, thanks for joining us, Tom, one of our panelists said to me today recently, is there an opportunity for impact investing for the rest of us? Well, today we're about to find out. The panelists that join me here have a keen sense and passion for democratizing impact investing, as they say, or making impact investing more inclusive. So whether you're a family office that's used to giving away, say, $20,000 in grants, or you're for an individual who are used to giving $20 a week to your local charity, we're here to let you know that there's a growing number of platforms, networks, and opportunities to get involved with. And today we're going to explore a few of these. First up, we're going to hear from Cam and Tom, who talk about their work at establishing and building Lend for Good, a platform that actually, just noting, won the 2022 Market Builder of the Year category at the Australian Impact Investment Awards. Congrats, Cam and Tom, for your work there. We're looking forward to hearing more from you about Lend for Good and what led you to that place. We also have Lindo, who's from Melbourne University, the Waddle Fellowship, but also is a friend of mine who I actually saw on LinkedIn. I was working, and I saw that she'd loaned, these small amounts that on the Kiva platform that has resulted in Lynn loaning up to $15,000 in total from very small amounts. And so I'm keen, especially for someone like myself who does those small amounts of donations, how we can actually then potentially provide loans on a platform like Kiva. And then finally, we're going to hear from Harry Turner from Talenton, who, whilst being Australian, mostly works with clients based out of the US. We'll hear from Harry about the work of the Talenton team, breaching the gap between capital impact and impact enterprises. And especially I'm keen to hear about how we might take some of the learnings from the US and other places to our work here in Australia. Now, to you as the audience, if you have any questions, please, type them into the Q&A function or the chat function, and I will keep an eye on those questions as we move along and probably take those after we've heard from the panelists. All right, that's enough from me. Let's get into it. I think we'll start off with Cam from Red Hat Impact, but also Lend for Good. Cam, can you tell us a little bit about your work, and then maybe lead us up into the ideas that sort of started to establish the ideas around Lend for Good and what happened there?
Sure, Stuart. Thanks, and hi everyone. I'm dialing in from Naarm, the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation, also called Melbourne. And it's my pleasure to chat to you all today, just on a topic that has been a key part, I guess, of my work over the last 7 years. So 6.5 years ago, we founded Red Hat Impact. With my co-founders, we were passionate about seeing more impact enterprises in the Asia Pacific succeed and grow. We kind of saw that many of them were getting trapped and stuck in being able to build on early success. And one of the things that they needed to be able to get through that was capital. But if we can think back to 6.5 years ago, 2015, 2016, the sources of impact capital were pretty scarce, and what was available was mostly equity. And in that equity space, what was really on offer was large, and people wanted to do larger deals. And so what we saw was a lot of founders that had promise were going after equity, doing equity too early, giving up control, and going for larger money than they really needed, because that was what was available. So the other thing that we saw is that when we looked around the world, is that the way that most small and growing businesses in emerging markets, as well as in Australia, grow on debt. Like, the borrowing money, flexible, scalable, targeted was a key way that they grow. And there was no one really offering that in the market. And what we also saw was this untapped market of people that you mentioned, Stuart, that are interested in being involved. People who have made decisions to buy their fair trade coffee and to put their super into ethical funds, kind of saying, well, what else can I do? And we were seeing the success of things like Kiva that Lynn's going to talk about, and crowdfunding, like with Start Some Good and Possible and others. And really in the real early emergence of crowd equity. And we saw that there's this untapped demand. And what we kind of said is the largest untapped impact fund in the world, which is all of us. It's us, right? And as you kind of said during the introduction. And so what we did is launch Red Hat Impact with those kind of principles. And we fast forward 6.5 years to now, and we have deployed over $3 million in loan capital across 40 loans. That are anywhere from $5,000 to our largest ones, $350,000. We've got over 100 lenders that have been involved, that have contributed anything from $500 to $75,000 into those loans, each one a syndicate of a bunch of people, individuals, organizations coming together. Only one of those 40 that we've done have defaulted. Everyone else has kind of had a pretty good track record and been able to grow their businesses. And that, at the end of the day, what we've been able to support is 40 impact enterprises, including businesses in Africa, businesses in Asia, Asia Pacific, but even those in Australia largely are delivering their impact in Asia Pacific or the region, or they're buying from supply chains out of Sri Lanka, Pakistan, bringing fair trade ethical goods to Australia for sale. They've been able to unlock the potential of their businesses and grow and deliver more impact for the world, which is what we were here for. But, you know, while we're pretty happy with that, the missing middle and impact finance, as we've been on this journey, we've learned that this is a problem, and it's trillions of dollars of gap in the market, right, for how we unlock the impact of growing emerging impact enterprises, whether it's in emerging markets or in developed economies like Australia. There is this gap, and we need more capital to be mobilized. And that's, you know, why we have, you know, been working with Tom and Start Some Good for the last 5 years now on this Lend for Good idea about, like, how do we take what we've done at Red Hat Impact and scale it up. So with that, Tom, I'll hand over to you to talk about our Lend for Good journey.
Yes, please, Tom.
Thanks, Cam, and thanks, Stuart, and everyone who's involved in organising this. And thank you to everyone who's come along to be part of the conversation. It's wonderful to see the level of interest in this topic and theme and mission of diversifying, democratising the impact investment opportunity. I just want to acknowledge I'm joining you from the traditional lands of the Camaragal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging here and on all the lands that you're all on as well. So yeah, as Cam said, we got talking 5 years ago that began a conversation and then an exploration and then a collaboration that ultimately allowed us to launch the Lend for Good platform, which is Australia's first retail impact investment platforms and one of the, you know, very first in the world. And that was very much fueled by, I guess, the work we've been doing at Start Some Good. So just to provide a little bit of context, Start Some Good's mission is to increase the pace of innovation for good, and we do that by trying to support more new ideas for social impact, providing more support and infrastructure at that very early stage, so that we can try more things, see what works, and hopefully, you know, scale up those solutions so that they can improve the most lives possible. And so we've been doing that for 12 years, and have really come to see this endemic gap that Cam's been talking about in focusing on those very early stages and helping people launch. What we see is a lot of people, you know, a lot of really amazing, passionate people and founders with great ideas and often very viable models who succeed in getting something off the ground with no investment usually. I guess particularly the people we work with, we started life as a crowdfunding platform. These days we run a lot of design programs, accelerator programs, and kind of CSR programs with brand partners as well. But all of those at a relatively early stage. And so we see, you know, particularly the people we work with tend to be on that more bootstrap journey initially, using crowdfunding as a source of early capital. And they get out there and they often prove that their model works, but that lack of kind of operating capital or strategic capital to invest in what's working hamstrings them and results in them getting kind of stuck at this early stage. And so we've just been seeing that endemically for over a decade now. And so when I saw, you know, or had already been seeing that for, I guess, the 7 years, the first 7 years of our life, when I caught up with Cam, and that was exactly what Red Hat Impact was focusing on. How do you, you know, so finding those early stage social enterprises who have proven that they have a viable model, who do have a growth opportunity, and then helping them find that capital to invest in that growth opportunity. And I instantly said, that's brilliant. That's exactly what we need. I'm so glad you're working on that. But as we got to chat more about their model, I'm like, you know, how scalable is that? What you really need is a platform doing what you're doing, but allowing that to scale up by providing more public access to it. And I said, so we'll help you make that. You know, we know about, we're good at launching platforms. We know all about platforms. I was a bit naive about what it would take and how different it would be to set up an actual investment platform with funds flowing in both directions versus our traditional crowdfunding platform, where the money just goes through to the project, they take it and run with it and send updates and sometimes products back. And so it took us a long time to figure out how to do that, but that's ultimately what led to Lend for Good. And why that's so important, I think, you know, what we're really trying to do with Lend for Good is solve essentially, we think, 3 problems that are holding back the social enterprise sector writ large, the impact business sector, to be able to really achieve the dream so many of us have for it, which is not just some great enterprises, but really a new form of capitalism, a new type of economy that is, designed around these social and environmental values such that we can transform society, not just have some, beautiful bright spots. And so the first of those massive problems is the lack of access those enterprises have to kind of more flexible capital when they are newer, but they do have a clear opportunity to grow. The second, we think, is the lack of access we have as individuals to invest in those sorts of enterprises, with the impact investment sector currently being almost entirely structured around funds, many of which have quite high minimum investments of $1 million or more. And that even, once you decide to participate in that, there's this kind of arm's length gap that emerges where no one's really making decisions for themselves and their own money. There are professionals making it with other people's money, and people sign off to them. And so it kind of lacks that emotional connection that fuels so much social change action, that fuels so much early stage startup investment, and that fuels philanthropy as well. But it's weirdly missing from impact investment because it all becomes this arm's length instrument. And then thirdly, for those funds, they have lots of money, but what do they lack? Deal flow. If you talk to them, they can't find enough social enterprises that are ready for the levels of investment they need, their model requires them to invest, and who are at the stage of validation to justify those investments. So they sit around with lots of money, but not enough deals. And in the middle, there's a lack of access for us, and a lack of access to opportunities to invest for us, and a lack of access to capital for them. And we think a platform like Lend for Good essentially solves those three problems together by giving passionate individuals who want to put their money where their values is access to vetted impact investment opportunities for enterprises at that earlier stage, thus allowing more of them to grow through that stage and reach the point where they're considered investable by those bigger impact investment funds. And ultimately, that's our theory as to how we can kind of unblock some of the opportunity here in the sector to really achieve our goals, writ large, all of our goals, I think, for the sector.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Cam. Yeah, well, you've certainly hit a mark that I was interested in, and I also work with the family office that are in that space, interested in impact investing, looking at, how they can enter the market, enter to have an experience, but also do good with their money, both through giving and through investing. So, it's a really, I think there'll be others on the call who are keen to learn more about what you've been doing. But just to illustrate the point a bit further, I wonder if we could just pick out one or two case studies that, you can take us through from start to finish of sort of what happened and what the different players, like, for example, you, Cam, from Red Hat,
Sure.
And then the platform. If you just lead us through one of those, that'd be great.
Yeah, let me pick that one up. So we've actually, I think, got on the call two of the enterprises that Red Hat Impact has been working with for multiple years, the Centre for Armed Violence Reduction and ATEC. I think Ben and Alistair are there on the call. Hi, team. They've actually got loans that are live right now with Lend for Good that they're raising, right? And so ATEC has a clean cooking solution that's been rolling out in Bangladesh and Cambodia. It's a kind of business where, the particular loan they're looking at the moment is these e-cook stoves. Now, they cost a lot of money initially up front to buy and manufacture. But the beauty of the ATEC business is then households are able to start using them and sign up and pay them off through a pay-go system over a period of time. And then gradually they assume ownership of those things. But for a business like ATEC, there's this capital crunch at the beginning and then a long tail of how stuff gets paid back. So for them, debt finance works really well as a way to accelerate how fast they can get products to market and get e-cook stoves into households and stop women breathing in the smoke from fires, which cuts down their life expectancy, but is also tackling carbon emissions and various things. So they're a business that we've now done multiple impact loans to through syndicates of people that, again, have contributed anything from $500 to $75,000. Some of those loans are paid. The current one is 30 months, 8%. You get repaid at 6 months. And what ATEC then can share back is the success they're having in the market, and you get that kind of information. Centre for Armed Violence Reduction, there's a very different model there. They're rolling out technology products to governments and agencies around the world to help them get guns out of communities and stop guns getting out there to fuel armed violence, right? But what they need right now is to spend money on accelerating the development of those technology products to multiple languages, upgrading databases, etc. So, they're looking for a loan for 6 months just to be able to get ahead of that, and they can pay for that out of money that they're going to get paid from their customers. They just don't have it in the bank right now. And so different kind of use cases, but these are businesses that are Australian entities that are delivering impact in emerging markets overseas. Very different types of thing. Clean cooking versus armed violence reduction. But as an individual or an organisation like a family office, a platform like Lend for Good allows you to have a look at lots of different types of things and think about, well, what's the impact that I'm passionate about or that I want to support? What's the loan terms I'm looking for? Is 6 months more my thing versus 30 months? What kind of interest rate do I want to get back? And the opportunity here is that a platform like Lend for Good doesn't prejudge what you as a potential investor might be interested in. We give you the choice of what to participate in, what to sign up to, the level at which you commit and get involved. And the same, importantly, on the borrower side, is there's no box they have to fit in that says, here's what the instrument needs to look like. It doesn't say we only do 12-month 10% loans. It starts from what do you need to be successful? And we think that's really key, to be able to start with the enterprise and say, what do you need to be successful? Oh, it needs to be 18 months. Most you can afford is 7%. You need a 12-month no repayment period. Great, that's what we'll ask for. But I think what this helps to do is to just help people get insight into what it actually takes to run enterprises, but they can make their own decisions. As Tom said, you're not just signing up to a fund that says we're going to invest in climate tech. There's more nuance than that. You can kind of go, well, I care about this in Cambodia, or I care about this in Tanzania, and that's where I've got some personal connection to East Africa. That's where I want to invest. And so it can be as granular as that, and we think that's important when we talk about democratizing and making impact investment accessible for the rest of us. Is we're not coming at this like, I'm trying to get my 12% return, just find me where I can get that and I'm doing good with my money. It's like, no, I specifically want to support this particular founder doing this particular thing. And we think that unlocks it for us as individuals and for the borrower.
If I could just offer a quick analogy, just to build on that quickly, and then I know we need to move on. The way that we generally do impact investment at the moment via those funds is a little bit like if the only way you could do philanthropy was to give your money to someone like Philanthropy Australia and then have them distribute it on their behalf. And while some people would still do that, people who are, like tax optimizing their money and so on, would be happy with that. And people who just believe in the philosophy of philanthropy. Philanthropy is, how to live a good life, and it's an important part of a healthy society. Most people are not into philanthropy. They're into these very specific things that resonate with them. They're into East Africa, as Cam said. They're into climate change adaptation. They're into supporting universal early childhood education. They're into supporting refugees better. They're into supporting, First Nations communities. All the specific things. And if you look at all the small family offices, like you're involved, and a big family office, even almost any family office out there, their mandate is not just support good things. It's to support specific types of good things. And so there's a mismatch at the moment between the products in the market for impact investment, which are too high level and abstract, and the actual mandate and interest people have and what they actually want to do with their money. So of course it ends up being finance first, because you don't know what you're trading off for. We think people are very comfortable trading off financial returns for impact, but they need to know what kind of impact they're trading off for. So when it's all just kind of becomes amorphous good things, it's just good stuff, then inevitably you draw a line around the financial return you want. I must have 10%. That's a reasonable financial return. But when you realize it's a chance to help girls get education through providing better cleaning technology that increases the lifespans of women in Bangladesh, you're like, well, that's awesome. I'm totally happy to invest in that at 6%. I still want a return, but now I know what I'm actually trading off for. And that's the opportunity now for, that we're trying to create for all the kind of smaller, both individuals, but also smaller family offices and foundations out there to now actually have access to that portfolio where you can align with the specific things you care about. And you can think about what for you is a fair trade-off between the financial returns and the impact you want to see.
Right. Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Cam. I've just got one quick question. I don't want to move on to Lynn, but I just wanted to, for the listeners, what's this? I know it's early days, but what is the average size loan amount that that is on the platform at the moment?
So if I could just quickly, our model is not what people imagine, which would be a two-sided marketplace, borrowers, lenders. We have a three-sided marketplace, which means every loan on the platform, every deal on the platform is led by an intermediary who's worked with that enterprise, done due diligence, and helped structure or at least endorse the loan. Now, so far, naturally enough, as the joint venture partner in creating it, Red Hat have led the first bunch of loans on the platform. They knew it was coming, they were ready for it, and they've made it, core business to do their loans in this way. So when you look at the platform, I think there's a danger in saying that's what a Lend for Good loan looks like, but actually what you're seeing is that's what a Red Hat Impact loan looks like. So they're in the, they're $30,000 to $130,000 in general, and they're 6 to 30 months approximately, and they're kind of, in kind of towards commercial. I mean, probably Cam, you could speak better on this, but they're a particular flavor. But we have a variety. We have 12 intermediaries signed, and some of them will bring very different styles of loans. 7-figure deals, of which they've put in the first half, and now they're looking for co-investors for the other half that will be much more patient potentially, and so on. But also potentially more commercial. So we hope to really offer that wide variety, as Cam said, because we have chosen not to. By designing this three-sided marketplace approach, it allows us not to preset this is what a Lend for Good loan has to be, and to prejudge what the market might be willing to support. Instead, it's a contracting engine essentially that people can leverage to create access to a whole variety of different deals.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Cam. I've got a heap of more questions to you, but we'll see if we get time towards the end. If not, other people jump in with their questions. But I want to just get Lynn into the conversation now and chat about probably smaller amounts of money, but still, reasonable amounts that you've got together in total. Lynn, I guess, first of all, maybe tell us a bit about yourself and what you do in your day job, but then also just tell us about how you got into this sort of idea, what drives you, what got you started, what keeps you going.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Tom and Cam, for your, just like really interesting work. It's always been one of those things that I've seen and been like, I know what they're both doing. And now I actually know what you're both doing. I also just want to acknowledge that I'm joining you all today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay respects to elders past and present. So I guess a little bit about me is that in my day job, I work at the University of Melbourne on an initiative called the Wattle Fellowship, which is all about enabling and unlocking the leadership that the planet needs, and starting first and foremost with the generation that were essentially not just born into the climate crisis, but as a result of that, born into a real sense of climate angst as well. I don't think a day goes by where I don't speak to a young person who doesn't not just like understand the science of, what climate impacts are going to look like in their lifetimes, but also understanding that so many solutions are available. And I think so often when we think about climate change, we think about big policy debates, such as like the safeguard mechanism conversation happening in Canberra right now. We think about like the big technological solutions and like how many more engineers do we need? And it turns out a lot, and we don't have enough engineers in Australia right now, and that's a separate problem. Or there are those of us that think about, okay, one of the reasons why I care about climate is because nature is really important to me. So let's just buy up a lot of land and make sure that we protect the trees and protect biodiversity. And all of these things are really important, that like sort of role of like technology, advocacy, and also conservation. But I guess maybe it is reflective of my own story. But the role of people is also really important. And I think for a very long time, we've talked about climate change as climate change, this environmental issue, this issue that is completely devoid of people. And as a result of that, we don't bring in elements of justice, we don't bring in elements of equity, and we don't bring in elements of what does self-determination look like as well with some of these solutions, whether that means, us building, and when I say us, I guess in this context, I'm referring to like those of us that aren't Indigenous to Australia going onto effectively country to build solar panels. And these are some of the things that I guess like we're grappling with at the Wattle Fellowship, really thinking about how do we unlock the leadership that's needed in all of these realms. And fundamentally, it's people who lead. And in our instance, we're sort of focusing on tackling this in some ways not too dissimilar to what Cam and Tom were talking about. Sums of money is really sort of fascinating, because the first time someone gives you $5, a parent for doing a chore, you're like, wow, this is the most amount of money I've ever had. I can now buy 2 whole lollies. Awesome. But when someone gives you your first donation, or like the first time you're trying to raise a round, and whether that's like a check for $1,000 or $10,000, it's significant. And the numbers sort of keep escalating, growing up and up. And there's something obviously really powerful about that, but it doesn't always correlate to what's the impact that you're ultimately looking to achieve as well. And that point of what's the purpose? And I think once you have that purpose and once you have an understanding of what it is you're looking to actually achieve, then you don't even necessarily need to use that language of, is this a trade-off to be only investing X versus Y amount, because you're actually just utilizing, whether it's your talent, treasure, or time in very specific ways. And these are some of the principles that we've been working with University of Melbourne students at this moment in time to embed into their work. And so that we actually put our money where our mouth is as well. We give each of these fellows $5,000, which when you're a student, it turns out what happens is the day that we sort of transfer this sum across, quite a lot of students get in contact with me to clarify that it's not spam, and given everything that's been going on with robo-debt, that at some point someone's not going to come and attempt to garnish people's taxes, which is both like mortifying and sort of hopefully one day a little bit funny. But anyway, that's a little bit about what I do, and I guess like some of the reasons why not just I'm personally passionate about how do we democratize impact investing / social change / effectively how do we use the capital that we have access to, but also why it's really important for us to be thinking about it, whether we're wearing a more traditional like philanthropy hat, impact investor hat, or even like practitioner hat as well.
Thanks, Lynn. Thanks for that background. Tell us a little bit about though.
For some reason, I can't hear you, Stuart.
So can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, though.
Yeah, great. Can you tell us a little bit about Kiva and what got you involved with Kiva?
Yeah, so what got me involved in Kiva is you just heard me talk a lot about, the context of what I do for work, which, using that sort of talent, time, sort of treasure frame. That's sort of how I hopefully use my skills and hopefully use my time as well. But then I realized that actually I make well above what the sort of median Australian income is. And whilst I haven't chosen like a for-profit type career, it doesn't mean that I don't have access to capital either. And one of the things that we were sort of always really raised with in terms of just like my own family upbringing was there's always someone that you could be helping. You just have to figure out who that person is, go and sort it out. And that was always sort of like the mantra in my head. So I think for many years, I was always that kid that was like running fundraisers for different sort of causes within schools and like figuring out who I donate to and, really like conscientiously sort of looking into, it doesn't matter if it's like $1,000 you have or whatever else, but doing that research. So one day I stumbled across Kiva. It was sort of around the time that the Grameen Bank in India was really, I guess, becoming quite significant as well, and discovering this concept of microfinance. Like, what does that sort of mean? And, micro to you and I might mean, yeah, $25 is not wild in terms of like the sort of investment that's required for most of us that are salaried, but $25 when the number of people that still live under $1 a day is like absolutely astronomical. So for those that aren't familiar, Kiva is effectively, I'd say, one of the world's larger sort of microfinancing platforms that are obviously options that are, really specific or run from Australia and whatever else as well. And the way that they work is that they work with local partners to find individuals. Sometimes it's collectives of individuals as well, which is a really common way of sort of organizing capital in other parts of the world, who have projects that will fundamentally change their lives. And whether that's, I need money to pay for some dental work, I need money to like install a toilet in my like particular house, I need money to be able to repair my like current tin shed situation so I can keep selling whatever product it is that they're selling. And loan sizes range anything from like $400 up to $200,000. But you as sort of like a Kiva lender effectively, all you're asked to contribute is $25. And that's $25 that, because the internet's a great thing, you can now set to be on auto loan, and different people so that you can re-contribute the initial $25 that you put in. So I put in $25, I think in my first year of university, some like 12 odd years ago. Obviously forgot about it because the repayments on $25 means that like every month you're making back about $1. And it just sort of like sat there. But when I re-stumbled upon the platform again, and I think was just more conscientiously thinking about what do I do with my capital, realized that, that like $25 is completely back. I didn't donate that $25. That was like my first experience of like lending from that sort of like impact investment, but at a different scale. And as a result of that, in the sort of like 5 odd years since, have decided to just on an annual basis put in about $1,000 US. into like what I'm doing on Kiva. And earlier this year, this LinkedIn post that Stuart saw, in the last technically decade, if we count from, you know, the very, very first loan that I made, have made over 3,000 loans totaling over $75,000. And if you asked me today, do you have $75,000 to give or invest into anything? I'd be like, no, I do not, but thank you for asking. But if you ask me, do I have $25? Could I potentially set aside $1,000 on an annual basis? And I think there's just something about how do you ensure that people are able to access various means of contribution, regardless of what their actual bank account sort of indicates. And it's like, it's remarkable to think that that is something that I've been able to contribute to. Like, it's still quite baffling even sharing it now.
Thanks, Lynn. And have you found, because when I started doing this work as well, I was sort of giving away, and then I've moved into sort of what you're doing, testing out these small amounts of platform, given what I can afford as well. And it's sort of, I know Tom said this before as well in another call, it's sort of mutually reinforcing. It sort of motivates you in more ways. You're giving, you're investing, you're doing, like do you feel that as well?
Totally. And I think it just becomes that thing of, I think I'm doing as much good as I possibly can in the like 40 odd hours that I work a week. But then there's all of these other hours where I'm either not working or other capital that I have access to that I could be utilizing in other ways. And I guess how I have always thought about it is I choose to work on climate change because I'm a typical millennial. I think it's one of the greatest like moral problems of our generation. But I also recognize that gender equality is super important, the intersectional lens that we need to bring in around how do we address Indigenous issues? How do we address sort of like land rights access? How do we address like poverty eradication? And I can't work at like 85 organizations. That's just not how like humans work. But it doesn't mean that I can't contribute in other ways. And I think you can either contribute through your voice, like, you know, the role that you choose to take on in your community, in like local advocacy or whatever else. But then there's also what you can choose to do with your dollar. And I think this idea of, you know, investing in like, or like investing in, when I say that, I mean like purchasing things from like B Corps or social enterprises has really sort of taken off. But it's sort of no different when you think about what are the other ways that you could be extending that impact to. And I guess it becomes a lot more sort of whole of person, as opposed to just thinking about people as, well, all you can do because you don't have like $1 gazillion is give your time and skills. All you can do because you have like funding is give, you know, your money, even though this isn't like, we know that's not true because people like being able to join boards, people like being able to contribute their professional skills as well. So I think it sort of takes it into a much more holistic approach, which is like reinforcing, as we've been talking about, and as a result, like it continues to motivate people to stay engaged.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. That's great. I want to come back to some more questions for you as well in a minute, and just to say to everyone that you have a bit of a chance to ask some questions, so please enter into the chat function or the Q&A function as well. But I do want to get to Harry before we sort of get tight on time. Harry, welcome. I'm keen to hear more about Talenton, but also especially your experience in working, not just being Australian, but also working with US clients and what you're up to there with Talenton. So please let us know.
Well, thanks. Firstly, I likewise want to acknowledge that I'm calling in from the land of the Darkinjung people, and I acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and their elders past, present and emerging. I'm going to start by saying I'm amused here because I run a fund, and so I have perhaps a slightly different perspective on some of these things, but perhaps as a little bit of a background to Talenton first. So Talenton is an impact fund. It's set up. It's a Delaware LLC, as many funds out of the US are. And we are set up to provide people with a way to invest in values-driven growth stage companies that create jobs, bring hope, transform lives. We have a focus area of East Africa. So predominantly all of our investments are in, all of our investments are in that region, predominantly in Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda, with one investment out of Burundi. And we invest in companies, as I mentioned, the growth stage, which means they're in this same missing middle of SME finance that Cam mentioned earlier, that have grown to a reasonable size but are pegged back by lack of access to capital. I think that the number I read was a $2 trillion funding gap or something, crazily large in that space. And so, we're doing our small bits to play into that space. And it's fair to say that we've seen some remarkable companies that are doing remarkable things that have struggled finding access to capital, and it's been a great privilege. If we had more time, I'd share a whole bunch of stories about the companies in which we've invested. But just as an example, we've invested in a company out of Rwanda that is a yogurt manufacturing business. Sorry, I lived in the UK for a while. Yogurt manufacturing business, and they employ largely deaf people, and it's one of the few jobs in Rwanda where people with disability like that are able to get a really meaningful job, and it's just a tremendous thing to go and visit that sort of environment. I think they have nearly 60% of their staff, including a similar percentage of their leadership team, who are hearing impaired. So just as an example of the sort of company that we've invested in. We set Talenton up, actually, and I like the Kiva example here. A number of the founders of Talenton had come out of a microfinance background and have a great deal of experience with Kiva. And Kiva is a brilliant platform, and it's a platform that allows small sums of money to be aggregated in a way that can create meaningful sums of money to microfinance institutions around the world. And that's a way, when you talk about democratizing the investment process, allowing people to participate in small sums, an aggregation platform is really meaningful. When we set up Talenton, we set it up with a mindset of allowing and enabling, perhaps not that small at an aggregation level, but allowing effectively an aggregating effect. To allow people with smaller sums in the order of sort of 25,000 to 100,000. We won't say no to larger investment, I should say, but we can take investments of a smaller size to effectively be aggregated through a variety of different, it's the right description, charitable platforms in the US. So predominantly, more than half of our investment comes out of what's called a donor-advised fund platforms. They might not be familiar to Australians. They're sort of similar in a way to PAFs, I think. They effectively allow a donor to put money into a charity, get their tax deduction so they don't cross the end of their tax year. They do that, and then they can distribute it to charities. They obviously don't get a chance to get the money back. It's been donated, but they can distribute that money through to charitable institutions. And in the US, there's a lot of money sitting unspent in that, more than $100 billion sitting unspent in donor-advised fund platforms, which we feel like is a real challenge for us to get it mobilized. And so we've set our fund up in such a way that those donor-advised funds can invest in us. And that means donors can put smaller sums of money in their donor-advised fund, whatever the limit of the fund manager is, and then they can make the investment on an aggregated basis into the Talenton Impact Fund, and then we can make larger investments. Our typical investment size in SMEs in sub-Saharan Africa is in the sort of $1 to $3 million range. So Talenton over the last few years has managed to raise, we're a little over US $20 million as a fund size, and we've invested about 60% of that at the moment. We're an evergreen fund, which is part of the structure needed to facilitate that. People needed mechanisms to come in and out of the fund as opposed to a traditional closed-end fund, which has its complexities, but it enables that sort of process to take place. So I'll pause there.
Thanks, Harry. Thanks, that's great. So donor-advised funds, I'm no expert either in connection to PAFs, but donor-advised funds, there's no obligation, as I understand, to spend any money of that money on impact, is there? We have in the PAFs, at least 5% has to be given to DGR1s in Australia, but yeah, is that true?
Yeah, that's right. So foundations in the US are required, as you've got here, to distribute 5%. For some unusual reason at the moment, legislation in the US doesn't require that of a donor-advised fund, so it can just sort of build and build, which is, I think, a weakness. But at the same time, it's it is capital that is intended in the long term for social good. It has to be given at some point in the future to charitable institution. I suppose what we're pitching at, and I think very similar to what you guys at Lend for Good are doing, is saying, well, while that money sits there, you have the opportunity to invest it in effect. And if you're running a family foundation, it's the same thing. You've got your opportunity for your corpus to be invested in the stock market, and you can put it in an index tracking fund, and then you'll have bits and pieces of all sorts of different impactful and not impactful companies, or negatively impactful companies. Or you can choose to take at least some of that capital and say, actually, I want it to be explicitly impactful, and then you can put it to work in a, I could say a platform like Lend for Good, or a platform, a fund like Talenton, or something like Kiva. Those things are all possibilities that people don't tend to think about, because they kind of think my corpus needs to be invested for some reason. It has to wholeheartedly be invested in some sort of index tracking fund, so that I don't get myself in trouble. And we're seeing a growth in the US of family offices, family foundations, and charitable institutions saying, we need to put at least a part of our corpus to work doing socially responsible, socially good things. And I think that's an important trend that I would strongly encourage any of the listeners here to sort of think through.
Yeah, well, definitely there's a movement in Australia, and it's a growing movement of family offices, people who have PAFs, to commit their PAF to 100% impact. And so the opportunities that come through Lend for Good, especially and others, will allow for that pipeline of investments. And I've often said to people with their PAFs, you've got to give out 5% or whatever it is every year through a PAF. If you get returns of 6 to 8%, you can literally have a self-fulfilling PAF and get quicker to 100% impact through doing that, where you've got I guess a 6 to 8% return, which is creating good impact, and then filling up your bucket so you can still keep giving those donations out. But I think that's a bigger debate to be had with what the trade-offs there. But one thing I want to touch on for everyone, actually, if I want to come back to everyone around a question, is it sounds like the idea of risk. When people are going from donating the money, they feel they've got their charity they've known for years and might have even known it before their parents were alive, and they said, this is the one I'm giving. It sounds like actually this is reasonably, it's not risk. I don't think business or investment should be risk-free, but it sounds like you've got good connections through Red Hat and the connection to platforms, what you're doing, Harry, especially with the organizations, the businesses you're investing in. How do you address that when people are a bit scared about putting their money into it? I'll start with you, Harry, and then we'll go to the Lend for Good people.
Yeah, I would address that by saying it's one of the big arguments to use to leverage a fund. We don't have 100% strike rate either. We have invested in companies that have gone through serious difficulty. We invested, for example, in an education company. We placed that money in late 2019 in Kenya. Kenyan schools closed in March 2020 for the best part of a year. It's a pretty hard time to be an investor in a education company. Point there being the fact that we have a diversified portfolio means that it gives you some degree of risk mitigation there. But I think it's really important to understand these things are not risk-free. Actually, doing this sort of investment in Australia is not risk-free. And so I think there's a lot of people looking for a risk-free alternative. And that's not a real thing. There isn't such a thing. And I think when people kind of get their head around that, you're in a much better place to understand that in any investment you make, you might have been an investor in Silicon Valley Bank thinking that was a risk-free investment because it's a bank, and next thing you know, it's no longer that. So it's very straightforward across all of the markets that any investment you make along those lines is not necessarily risk-free. We address that through the portfolio approach. I really like the approach the Lend for Good guys do with the sort of the triangle of investors using experienced advisors trying to mitigate those risks by bringing advisors. Sorry to answer on your behalf, guys, but I like that approach. I think it gives you some degree of risk mitigation. You get risk mitigation in Kiva by the diversification of the picture. So I just think there are mechanisms to reduce risk, but it never goes away.
Thanks, Harry.
Right.
Tom, look ready to jump in. Go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer, that's exactly right. That we shouldn't be, to some extent, it's really important that people understand none of this is risk-free. And then, it's about what risks are worth taking. And frankly, I think what risks that are worth taking are risks in the pursuit of actually like saving the world. And it's why I kind of often get a little bit frustrated in the impact investment community with the conversation about things like risk-adjusted returns, because we're always talking about the wrong risks. We're talking about the risks that an investor might lose some of their money. And I get it. That's, depending on who you are and where you are, that is it should be on all of our minds and can leave people in real difficulty. But honestly, where we should be centering the conversation here is the risk that we won't move fast enough, we won't innovate enough, and we won't actually, because then all of us will be in distress, our entire biosphere. So I think partly that's one of the pieces that I think subtly reframes the entire conversation in the wrong direction. Whenever you hear someone bringing up risk adjusted, let's have a conversation about impact adjusted instead. But the other two mechanisms, just to build on Harry, another mechanism is just smaller amounts that people often don't think about. It's a lot easier to be risky with $50 than with $500, than with $5,000, than with $50,000, than with $500,000, And so, but the big thing that we saw even with our original crowdfunding platform in a way, I mean, that's super high risky investments. People aren't expecting a return, but they're hoping something good happens with their money when they're supporting a brand new and often these projects they get funded on, start some good. And our traditional crowdfunding platform is someone with no track record doing something that's never been done before, that is kind of highly likely not to succeed, but they're looking for $15,000 to try it out. And I individually are putting in 50. And so, the risk for me is completely acceptable. It's high risk, but low impact on me, myself. And so I think, again, by giving people the opportunity to put in an amount that is personally acceptable for them, again, allows them to decide what feels risky for me. My $50 is someone else's $5,000 in a very different wealth situation. And so that's one thing. And then the second, I think, kind of mechanism that can kind of, that interrelates with risk, we think is transparency. And that's why we've, built Lend for Good on a private blockchain. It's not crypto, but it's using the blockchain as both a contracting engine, but also really importantly, a transparency engine. And so it's people building up a track record over time. And I think Red Hat Impact is a great example of this, because they've been doing this thing that is categorically high risk, unsecured lending to early stage social enterprises, like as an entire category that's considered really high risk. But they've been doing it for 5 years with, approximately a 100% success rate so far, some renegotiations and so on the way with COVID and so on, but essentially, and so at some point, and absolutely, we must always remind people that past performance doesn't guarantee future returns. But I do think that's the kind of thing people want, simple heuristics to be able to guide their decision making, and fundamentally track record is not a bad place to start as a simple heuristic. And so one of the things I'm excited about with Lend for Good is just our ability to surface more of this by putting on a platform that is transparent. There's a lot of great people out there who have real expertise, as Harry said, bringing in those expertise, people who know what they're doing. Right now, it's kind of hard to actually figure out who really knows what they're doing and who does have those expertise. And by adding this transparency, people can begin to understand that while, Red Hat, what they do is categorically high risk, they appear to know how to do it in a way that is relatively low risk because they're good at it. And so we can better recognize those expertise and then back people who demonstrate those expertise and that track record.
Thanks, Tom. Cam, you want to add anything there? No, good. Well, look, we're getting not close to time, but I do want to give a bit of time for everyone to say their final bits if there's things that have, you've left out or whatever. So I'll start with you, Lynn. If there's anything in your mind you would like to share with the crowd today.
Lots of thoughts circulating in the head. I guess like everyone has joined this webinar today because you're already engaged in this work in some capacity, and either thinking about how you do more or how you, as Tom was just saying, extend yourself in a way that feels comfortable from a risk perspective, but means that you're also trying something new or not doing something different. And I don't have one like this is the thing you need to do, because it's quite like a personal decision and lots of factors to consider. But hopefully everyone has at least a semblance of what they might be able to action in the sort of coming months, or keep in mind for those that are going to the Impact Investing Summit over the next couple of days.
Thanks, Lynn. Cam, do you want to say a couple of words?
Yeah, sure. I think, just to pick up on Tom's point about like risk, I think, if we come back to what this topic was about democratizing impact and inclusive impact investing, and what you said at the start there, Stuart, like it's not just impact investing for the rest of us. Like, it's going to take all of us to create the things that we're trying to do, to see the transformation in communities, to change the way capital works so it works for people who are currently left behind. That's going to take us all acting together. And I think that's another way to think about risk. Like, when we're not talking here about people acting alone, we're talking about how we collaborate, how we cooperate, how we share inspiration, how we share stories, how we help each other. And I think, this for us, we think of Lend for Good not as a financial thing. It's a movement. This is about building a movement, a community of individuals and organizations coming together with intermediaries and borrowers to create the world that we want to be a part of, because it's not being done. And so how do we get involved? And yes, that's risky. Yes, that takes effort, etc. But it is, the problems we face are collective, and our solutions should not be individual. And so for us, for me, there's a philosophical underpinning to what we're talking about today, which is it must include all of us. If it doesn't, we're not going to get to where we need to go.
Thanks, Cam. Great point. Impact investing for all of us, not just the rest of us. But yeah, it's fantastic. Tom, final few words.
Yeah, I really think, Cam's really nailed it there. That's really what we care about. It's why I found myself in social enterprise in general, I would say. Just because not because I think it's a superior method of changing the world versus nonprofits and community groups that I used to work in, but just that it's another set of tools that we also need to deploy. And so I think sometimes you run into a little bit of black and white thinking in this space. There's people who think that, I've met people who seem to think that, nonprofits are fundamentally unsustainable, illegitimate, and can't be trusted, and only a business is like a real thing in the world that has any credibility. But of course, there are several, there are nonprofits that are hundreds of years old, and we would consider that they are sustainable with what they do. And so I'm a bit of a yes and to all those things, and so I think one of those black and whites you often see in the impact investment sector is that impact investments have to return traditional commercial returns on capital. And I think they can. I'm not saying that's not possible, but I'm just saying, we're going to need all the things as well. And right now we're kind of bifurcating. We're building a system where people swing from one to the other. They do philanthropy, and we're encouraging them to do finance first, impact investment as well at the same, but only provide. And then we're missing this whole space in between of things that can provide a return and can do good, but maybe are not, but don't want a donation, but also maybe can't pay the returns on capital that capital owners have become used to, and that should be okay, because again, we need all the spaces in between. So I'd encourage, I guess my final call to action is, for a lot of family offices and so on out there, step one is doing the two, but now they're just oscillating between the two wings. And I'd really encourage people to start thinking about what it would look like to explore that space in the middle. That can involve, exploring new forms of investment with different types of structures and returns. It can also, I think that's also the space where the notion of venture philanthropy is really important. So it's still philanthropy, but using an investor mindset in the way you do philanthropy, thinking about what we need to catalyze and set up that can then be scalable and sustainable and not necessarily rely on those ongoing injections forever. And finally, obviously, I just want to make a very clear call to action that we'd love you all to check out Lend for Good. It's very partnership driven. It's partnerships built on top of partnerships built on top of partnerships. The whole thing is a joint venture between two social enterprises. Then we've built this highly partner driven model with the role of intermediaries. And of course, ultimately it requires the great social enterprises like those who joined us today, but also, mission driven investors to come along. So if you think you could fill any of those roles or want to explore any of those possible roles, please come to the site and fill out our expression of interest form, and we'll follow up with you.
Thanks, Tom. Yes, the continuum of capital is a very interesting one. I'll be happy to talk to any family office, anyone interested in that as well, because we've explored everything from the role of philanthropy right up to impact investing and everything in between. And it's all needed. Let's be honest about that. Yeah. So Harry, last words.
Yeah, last words. Firstly, I just want to flag here that people who are sitting on, if you like, donation pots of capital, that's already risk adjusted. You've already received the owner of the capital has already received a tax break for that capital. We should remember that's risk adjusted capital on the way in, so it doesn't necessarily need to perform in the same way as capital. And part of what we have done with Talenton in setting ourselves up so we can take investments out of these if you like, risk-adjusted pots, is allowed them to be the front runner, to be the leader, to mobilise in the future the larger pools of fully commercial capital. So I just want to encourage people who are, running family offices or groups with charitable capital that they're thinking about investment, that actually think really hard about it, because you guys are the people who will make that lead. And following your lead, Tom, we do have a PAF invested in Talenton, so it's entirely feasible. If you're interested, feel free to reach out to me.
Thanks, Harry. Well, we're out of time. It's been a great conversation. I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation with many of you at the Asia Pacific Impact Investment Summit up there in Sydney. So thank you, Tom, Cam, Lynn and Harry, for your time, and also for everyone listening on, and also especially to the AIDN team. Claire, thanks for your introduction. The recording will be available on the AIDN website in the coming days, so look out for it. And please email us if you've got any feedback or comments about the session. Or if you'd just like to discuss impact investing, you can contact myself or Julie Rosenberg at AIDN. So I would like to wish everyone a great day, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Come say hi if you're at the Impact Investment Summit.
Yeah, thanks. Bye-bye.